All right, all right. Well, we don't have a countdown today, but hey, that's how life is. But welcome back, everybody, to the Created Economy. Today, we'll be doing our created office hours. Actually, let me share this little presentation here so that I can first just make sure. Today is not November 3rd. This is deck for tomorrow, but you can live with that. Just welcome back. This is Created Hours, our office hours for the creator economy, where we bring together founders and creators, all to have talks about topics that are relevant. Also, our main goal here is ultimately to help folks get unstuck if you're stuck in some way, trying to build your launch, your business, your community, whatever it may be. We do have 3 shows a week, by the way. Tuesday is our first show. This is the Created Hours. On Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Pacific, though, we will have the Created Economy, our interview series. And then on Friday mornings, we have Creative Breeze, which is our new show. So by all means, feel free to join us for one of those if you have a moment to join us. What else can I say here? Give us a follow, by the way. Ken, we did hit 100 subscribers today on YouTube. I saw it. I got a screenshot, but do give us a follow over on YouTube, on Twitter, on Flipboard, or Twitch. We are Created Economy in all of those places. We appreciate your support. We share lots of links throughout the week, so it's a good opportunity for you to find out or get ahead of the curve in the process. We are doing our AMA drop. So by all means, AMA is the official coin of the Created Economy show. It is a way for us to reward our community for our participation, and of course, for you to show your support back. Every week we do a drop of one kind or another. I believe this week there's a coin available. AMA is riding high right now at about $2.30. So get in and get some more for yourself. You do have to hold some AMA though to acquire it. So by all means, feel free to scan this QR code and grab some. We also do have a Slack. So we do have the official Created Economy Slack, where a lot of our founders and friends are usually available. We have talks behind the scenes about things that are going on, and we also source lots of leads and content for the show. By the way, tomorrow we do have John Allen joining us from Lava, so we look forward to sort of having you there for that interview. It should be very interesting to talk about what's going on with social audio and all those other bits and pieces that are evolving quickly. So I do have some friends with me today. Arnold, are you there? I'm going to bring you up as well. Peter, raise your hand if you want to come on stage. If not, I will leave you there just observing. All right. Peter does not want to join. He turned his camera off. See, I'm going to invite some of our other friends back up on stage as well. So today we're going to be talking about a question that was asked to me recently that really had me thinking for quite a while, just really about how to service the long tail of the creator economy. What's up, Abhinav? What's up, Hossein? How are y'all? Look at that. Now I hear no voices. You see, the problem when you build a streaming platform is that when you don't hear audio, you're inherently fearful that something's broken.
Well, hello, Greg. Don't want to give you a heart attack there, buddy.
Arnold is working. Ken says, wait, Ken, who can't you hear? Oh, you're talking to Hossein. We had this problem with Hossein last time. Abhinav is working. All right, good. In any event. Hossein will sort out, I'm sure. But yeah, so I got posed this interesting question, which was, how do you not have the concentration risk, basically? I think, is that Hossein?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay.
Right. But
I loaded up Camo. I don't know if you ever heard of Camo, that allows you to use your phone as a camera, and it takes over your settings. So sorry about that.
No worries. But yeah, so the question that came up was, how do you avoid concentration risk, I guess, is sort of like the way it was framed to me, which is, I think, ultimately, we're all building platforms here for creators, but how do you avoid having too much of your revenue sort of coming from like too few of your customers, right? And by the way, this problem I believe is fundamentally is not specific to the creator economy. Almost all I'm just going to post lean. Almost all startups, all companies of any size, sort of fundamentally face these sort of challenges of like, hey, we've got, you start selling, and then suddenly like one or two customers run away. They represent the majority of your revenue. But I did think it got me to thinking, and at first blush, I tried to give the best answer I could, but I think the reality is that it did trouble me to some degree, because I was like, well, I feel like I could have given a better answer. And in reality, there was a better answer. And it turns out that everything we've been working on, as long as we've all known each other, is actually about how to actually service more of the creator ecosystem, not less of it, right? We're all trying to open doors and broaden the breadth of opportunity that's available. So I was just curious, going around, and we can go through the thread that we put together. This is one of the benefits of being in the Slack. I shared the thread yesterday. Everyone had some chances to provide feedback, and I made some edits. So, I'm thankful for all of you for providing some help as well. But I went through and laid out a bunch of points. But first, I'd just love to get your first blush, your first impressions, and then let's try to go through some of that thread, like maybe point by point for some of the ideas. Who wants to go first? Arnold,
I can just
you're already
get us started. Yeah. So look, I think that it's a good question. It applies in, like you said, all businesses, and I think the question won't even relate just to size, right? I think it was probably asked in the context of the size of creator that you might be focusing on. Fewer larger creators versus more medium to smaller size creators, but also the type of creator, right? The nature of the creator, what are the other attributes of the creator? What kind of area they focus on? Are they focused in a area that's kind of upward trending, or something that is kind of stagnating and perhaps declining? So I'd say from a portfolio basis, as you think about any business, that is something to consider across. Like, it's always good to consider and have more diversification. But I'd say, I think that there's a certain amount of having larger creators. It shows proof of concept, because people are able to believe in the product up front. If you have 100 smaller creators, then the question still remains: well, is this really a prime product? And so I think starting with the larger creators, or if that's possible, then broadening it, diversifying it, having a more portfolio, that to me makes sense. But I think still in my head, it makes sense if you can start on the larger end.
Yeah, no, I kind of second that, Abhinav. I think that makes a lot of sense, like, to me too. Like, my initial reaction when I saw that post, right, was, well, I don't think you can like really attack both at the same time, right? I think you have to sort of pick a place where you want to really try to build and grow, because for me, like, both of those, I mean, I'm going to generalize really quickly, but both of those groups, like, you'll say like large creators and then like smaller, maybe up and coming creators, I think they just have very different needs. And I think you have to really just sort of focus in on serving one of those customer areas. And like, I think certainly if you choose the larger creators and you start there, like, to your point, then that sort of I don't know, I guess the credibility you get from that, right, with those larger creators saying, yeah, like, we sign on, this is an awesome platform, it makes it easier for up and coming creators to go like, well, if it's working for them and they're hugely successful, I could probably get a similar level of success. So yeah, so I don't know, I guess to sum it up, my initial take is just, I think definitely you have to choose either. There's a good argument for either or, but I think you have to choose one. I don't know that you can say, I'm going to launch a platform, I'm going to support everybody on day one, because I think it's just so many different things you have to solve for.
Did we lose Greg? Are we hosting now?
I think so. Did Greg just trick us to running the show?
Okay.
No, so I guess until Greg gets back, if you like, I am curious, like, with what you're building, did you guys sort of pick an area to focus with UR Feed, or are you kind of
I mean, we've tried, different size creators. Greg's back. we're about to take a hard right and start changing the topic and discussing a whole new range of things.
I was listening, but yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to react to that, though, I guess, to some degree, because one of the challenges I have is that the things that large creators need it doesn't usually scale, right? Like, and I think like one of the mistakes that a lot of creator companies make is they think that they can take like the tools that make the 1% successful and then just give them to the 99%, right? And I think that there's a lot of risk in that because, if you ever tried to grow an audience, say you have a channel that's already started, say, and then you start a second channel, it's a lot easier the second time to get those people than it is the first time, right? Yeah. But if you were starting now clean, it is way harder than that person who started way, way back, right? Because like the network was smaller, discoverability was better, right? Like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it feels to me like that is one of the potential risks of sort of like starting with the big folks and then trying to like just resample it, I guess, or whatever downwards, right? For the smaller audience. And so that was sort of my initial just reaction, I think, to like, I hear what you guys are saying, but I'm enough to your point. The thing I would say is small doesn't mean invaluable, right? Like, so I think like you used a good argument, but it tends to be an argument about like scalability, not necessarily a value, right? Like, so I think you're right. Like take Zealous, like, will this scale if there's 10,000 people in the room? That's a scalability question. It's a reasonable question to ask, right? Like, and the answer is probably no, right? But the flip side is it valuable? It could be valuable like with 3 people, right? Like, so and when we were chatting about this in the Slack, Arnold, like you sort of asked that question also. My frame was like more thinking about it in terms of revenue than about the size of the creator. Like could we separate the conversation like from the revenue, but like from like the audience size, engagement stuff, like, and maybe move it towards like revenue potential as a normalizing factor or a way to think about, a creator and their audience.
Well, and even with that, Greg, I guess I'm kind of curious, where would we draw that line? Even if we're going to use revenue as the metric, right? Are we going to say, I don't know, some dollar amount per year, 25,000 a year, whatever, is what we're considering to be the large creator, and below that is the smaller? Because I don't know.
I don't know that that's a distinction that matters per se. Like, I guess like here's the thing, like to me, then this becomes a math equation, right? Like, so just working back from like an ICP sort of kind of model, right? Like, what's my ideal customer profile? Like, could I make like, so for example, like I'll use Zealous as an example. For us to operate a stream for you of any number of people, maybe it costs us like $1 per stream or something like that, let's just say, right? Which means that for me to break even, I got to make back at least like $4 a month or whatever it's going to be, right? Like if you had one user. So I think like there's some mathematical triangulation that's possible, but I don't know that we need to judge the market per se unless it's in service of like our cost analysis, our profit potential, and stuff like that. Right now we may decide that like this isn't worth operating, like a business if you're going to have a network of 5 or 10. Like I think for both of your products, they benefit from larger audiences, right? But I don't know that they're exclusive to larger audiences. However, the counter there is that like the amount of energy and attention required to operate and manage a product like you both, like we all operate, right? Like the effort that goes into it, like sort of has like this inflection point where before like that ramp upwards, it's just not worth it usually, right? So you're trying to quicken the point to where someone sees the time to value, right? Like in investing in the platform.
And I think our discussion, just to make sure that we don't miss, because I think a lot of our platforms that we're building are that in the sense they are platforms. There are other creator economy tools that may be more sort of services focused, and they, that don't really require the distribution of the creator doesn't really matter, right? Whereas the things that we're building are a little bit more dependent on the distribution. So I think that, the answer to this question is probably quite different depending on whether you're building a platform that requires distribution or you're building a tool that's just purely providing a service for every creator.
Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah, because I guess the frame for me, the question is really like, aren't we all building? So let's separate platforms and services. I absolutely agree. Like, I think like from a services point of view, there's definitely, you don't need a lot of scale to be successful, right? Like, except if, for example, the perceived value of the service you offer is low, right? At the same time, though, to some degree, our businesses that operate like on take rates, they're almost like they can't, like, they kind of operate like services business, right? Because like they operate on non-SaaS recurring revenue sort of thing. Like we're all at the whims of other people getting involved or them being good promoters or marketers. Hosseline made a comment I think is a great one. He's like, there isn't any creator curriculum, right? And there probably should be. And I think that speaks to this point, right? Like who's doing a SaaS? Is anyone doing a SaaS for their creators? None of us are, right? Not as our primary revenue, at least, maybe the supporting revenue. But so you see, like, we're still we're in service of them, right? Like, so like we're offering as much as possible with the hopes that they're gonna go create something, right? And deploy our product in a meaningful way. So yeah, I think there's some challenges here. Now, by the way, I sort of alluded to this earlier. I don't think you can fight this reality, right? Like there's sort of the nature of the beast that everything that has a non-homogeneous kind of customer base is going to end up with sort of a power law, right? Like, almost no matter what you do, right? Like even if you sell to SMBs, there's SMBs that the government calls like SMB with 500 employees, and then there's like what we think about, like, which is us, but like one employee, right? Even inside of that bundle, right? Like you still have pretty diverse sort of spread of people, right? And their needs are different, their ability to monetize. So Arnaud, what you were asking, like, which I thought was a good question, is like, is it 25,000 or more? I'm thinking about this article Abhinav shared from Brian Balfour, like where he talks about, like, unpacks like all of this stuff about Patreon's revenue, right? And sort of how they make it. The cynical thing to read is like, it's all whales, which is sort of how I started reading it, right? But I think the alternative point of view is that they're triangulating on the folks that they can make successful. So this is just no different in my book than like Superhuman doing, survey-based onboarding, right? Like and qualifying every lead to make sure that you're the right fit, right? Like for the product, more so than an open door policy where everybody can come in.
Yeah, we in the end, we're going to be successful by having successful customers and those stories, making sure that more of the people that are using our platforms are walking away with delight moments and going, okay, that was a game changer for me, and then evangelizing that. And for every user that comes on and doesn't have that experience, and I think that maybe it's too much of an assumption, but smaller creators who we don't have enough touch point, if there's lots and lots of smaller creators, we have less influence in being able to make them successful, to show them, give them enough time to guide them to that success, that that there's a higher risk that they're kind of, whatever they do by themselves will be what creates our success. So larger customers allow us to feel more in control. Maybe that's right or wrong, but I think that is part of why we do it.
Yeah. I think that's right, though, because I think success stories, customer proof, social proof, I think is ultimately the virality sort of model, right, for us. But by the way, this is the problem that sort of this Patreon article actually also talks about, right, which is that that virality almost is like works against them, right? Because like people hear or see these stories of that person's winning, and then everyone's like, I'm going to do it, but they don't invest the time, the energy, the work. They don't understand the resources that went into getting to that point. And so people think they just start and boom, it's like suddenly going to work, right? And I think that also can have some interesting challenges. Who here is onboarding by hand right now? Like individuals? I am. So I think that makes, I think that just speaks to sort of the ultimate reality is that in the beginning, we know so little about who we're trying to service that we learn by asking and helping as much as we can. So I'm just going to bring up this thread now because I had some points I made up. Well, I guess I made a lot of points in here, but I wanted to see if there was any highlights or there are comments or feedback that anyone else had on some of these ideas. Hey, Jocelyn, welcome back. Here we go. But I got it. Boop. And now it's there. All right. So the whole point of this thread was, what could we do as builders that would make it possible for more people to be part of the process, right? Presumably everyone or anyone should be entitled or could be a user of our product. So like, what could we do to optimize for this? So, and I highlighted like a number of different tweets here, but one of the things I thought was really interesting was like Andrew Chen made this like important sort of point out this like sort of transitional change that we're going through, right? Because he said the next generation of social, which is in opposed to the previous one, is like small networks or algorithmically driven big ones, creating real connection with people, letting creators own their audiences, monetizing directly with subscriptions, NFTs, etc., and evolving media format towards interactivity. Well, it sounds like I'm doing a bunch of good things. Sounds like you're doing a bunch of good things from Andrew's point of view. But the thing is this: small doesn't often scale, right? Like there's the Dunbar number for a reason, right? Like you can only maintain so many meaningful relationships in your life, right? And so if this model is to be successful, it means higher signal, higher value, right? Potentially more exclusivity, right? Does that strike you guys as is sort of like the read on this?
No, that's my take on it as well. And I mean that's a big part of what we're building is kind of with that exclusivity focus in mind, right? To get the group smaller, with more folks that are more like-minded, and just there's these different tiers of like fan, super fan, etc. I think he kind of hits the nail right on the head. I think the exclusivity part is a really important piece to the closeness part, right? Once it gets very large, the group, then I think that's just it's more challenging in my opinion.
I think it's also the rise of Snapchat was based off exclusivity, right? Because it was almost counter Facebook and 10,000 friends. Now you have a set group of friends that you have a conversation with, and then that scaled so that it became a distributed broadcast model. But it still had this level of intimacy that was part of the Snapchat model, which is just like it seems like you're just talking to one person, but you're speaking to many. And that was like part of the transition, I think, to where we are now, where we have both sides, where we have the bigger audiences, the Twitches and that broadcast, and you still have the Facebook model and the kind of the Twitter model. We have like a lot of individual conversations type of thing. So it's finding the balance of both of those two things from a creator standpoint. But going back to what I said before about there isn't a curriculum for creators. What tends to happen is a lot of copycat creators where they would tend to follow someone that's successful and they just do what they do type of thing. And it's mostly around the content side. So this is where, for example, the YouTube creators would tend to be like push the extreme as to what they're going to talk about. And a lot of the times the same concept of the content gets created by various creators because it's already worked before. The whole like gold digging car thing, the annoying people in the store thing, which is unfortunate. So then there's some people that break through, come up with some original content. Like, for example, the French African guy that's all about like making things simple with the hands. He was genius because he appealed to every single country because he never said anything. It was all mimed. So he's doing the hands thing, and that's how you know him. And now he's doing that forever, which is nice. And it doesn't get old, and you know the punchline all the time. So I know I deviated a little bit from what you were talking about, but I think that the whole concept of like developing this audience and then transitioning that audience into a monetizable revenue stream, I think that's really where the challenge becomes for creators, because it could amass a bunch of people, but then where does the monetization come from when they haven't been kind of groomed to do that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I was saying one thought with that, right? And I think this kind of comes back to Greg, even that core question that you were asked, right? Like about, how do you keep just from servicing like maybe this top creator? I think that's really the one of the big challenges, right? That's the clear, I guess, line like of where the needs are. Like the smaller creators need that additional help to actually build that audience to have that following, right? Whereas the larger creators tend to already have that following. They're just bringing that group to the platforms that we've built to find additional ways to monetize, right? And so I don't know. I think that's where a big part of the challenge lies. Is if you're trying to certainly to serve that entire group, it's going to be very challenging because it's just two completely different needs, right? And I probably say distribution is probably more what the smaller creators really need in the early days to help build that following. So I don't know. It's just a thought that.
So let me ask you a question about that, Arnold. Like, there's two philosophies in startups, right? And so fundamentally, I think we all largely agree, creators are founders, right? So there's one startup model which is go raise money externally, right? And then grow and figure out revenue later. Well, let's just say figure out revenue later, not necessarily raise money, but we'll figure out how to make money later. There's another model, which is like bootstrapping, which is like, we're going to do whatever it takes. We're going to make money as early as possible in the process, right? That dichotomy sort of seems to exist in what we're describing now, right? Like we keep couching this in like figure out how to make money later, but like, why aren't we having more conversations about how to make money now, right? Like, so, I think like the Andreessen Horowitz post I linked to in here as well sort of talks about, it's one of my items here. It's teaching creators how to sell. Yeah, it's this one here, right? So number 6, embrace commerce. Creators must sell to succeed, whether they like it or not. That may be selling a brand, their own brand, or their fans. Commerce is converging with creators, and we must make them better. Most creators can't sell, right? If you could ask for money up front, right, you might be able to get to some of these points faster than if you're waiting to get to money, right? Like, and so the old model, like, and I would say the historical model, not necessarily the old model, because there's still people starting today with the same philosophy, was grow a really large audience and then shake opportunities out of having the large audience. Whereas I believe where we're transitioning to is you can monetize a small audience. You can monetize an audience of one technically if you're good enough, willing enough, right? And focused enough on the process and delivering value.
Yep. There's not enough discussion to talk about the tipping economy type of thing and how to transition that in an ethical, transparent, and smooth way. Because when you get a big audience, yeah, it's technically easier and people see it like, well, you already have the big audience, but how do you transition, especially a creator that does a lot when you're bootstrapping, because it's like editing the video or doing that, and it's like there isn't a LinkedIn for creators that they could access. There's Fiverr and stuff like that. But I think that there needs to be more discussion on the various levels of creators. You generally can map out and use the influencer model to some degree, even though influencers tends to be, a sticky point or sticky term now, but it's the same. And it has to be, not has to be, but I think that the easier way to kind of, categorize things is audience size, right? If you want to go from this audience to that audience, here's some tools, here's how to look at it. There's no discussion on analytics, right? Like there's analytical tools out there, but what are the analytical tools that these creators need to really hone in on to grow to that next level? There's not a lot of discussion there that I don't see, unless you guys correct me if I'm wrong there. But there's no process for either. Certain creators are going to create and do well. Other creators are just going to get frustrated and leave and, disconnect from social, and go through the whole, that transitional process. But I think even this conference that you mentioned, the Independence, did you attend that, Greg?
The information one? Yeah.
Yeah, the creator one that was just, wasn't it like yesterday or something like that?
There was, I think, last week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but I think, so we've talked often about like this transition of like going from having an audience to having a community, right? That's like that's a pretty fundamental level up, right? Like for folks. There's also this other one, which is kind of orthogonal from that, which is going from an audience to customer, right? Because it is very different. I saw someone a thread about this or somewhere they were talking about it, but it is very, very different to go from like someone consuming something you make for free to asking them to pay for it, right? Like even a penny, right? It's just a big, huge difference to ask for money. Like the bar is so much higher when you're asking for money, right? So like a paid community is like the double whammy, right? Like, because you haven't necessarily mastered how to like service a customer. And then on top of that, you have to service a community, right? So I think I think a lot of what I'm sort of like circling around here is less the community parts, but more just the customer thinking, right? Like the earlier we can help creators have a customer-oriented mindset, not a fan or follower or subscriber-oriented mindset, it seems like that helps in all of what we've described in unlocking this gateway to like sustainability, right? Like when you look at this doc, like this article about Patreon, what do they call them, Abhinav? FCP?
Financially stable creators.
Right. Financially successful creator metric, right? Yeah. So that's a great way to frame like as a extended KPI of like how many people have we actually. This is like the matchmakers who track how many weddings they produce, right? Like, but that is our goal, right? Is like creating sustainable businesses for individuals who are now becoming entrepreneurs.
Yeah, and I think there's also two prisons. Like the original question that started the thought process on this was from an investor. So that's one side of things where they're trying to understand, okay, sure, you'll get these guys, and what about that? And they're it's so concentrated, and what about big small customers? And then there's sort of the Andrew Chen sort of A16 side of things who are talking about inclusiveness, and so I think one is a pure sort of business risk assessment. From the other side, from the inclusiveness side, I think in many ways, going for bigger creators helps you subsidize smaller creators. If you can do a take rate model, right, which is if you make money, we make money, well then you've made it easier for the smaller creator because they don't have a fixed fee. They don't have to pay you $50 a month or whatever it is. So you're able to subsidize them by going for bigger creators. So as long as you don't price them out by perhaps even by having that SaaS model, or maybe depending on the level of pricing, and as long as it's simple enough, as long as by making the onboarding as more and more simple as possible, you're creating a system where they can come on without needing the handholding. So you can continue to give attention to perhaps the bigger creators that are going to move the needle, but by making sure that onboard and the pricing are not blockers, you still leave the door open for the full range of the community to come on and use your tools. So some of this kind of depends on the level of distribution that person has or people have, how much coaching they're going to require. Like, are they somebody that's already running a huge business? You're kind of, they're going to be telling you how this is going to work, right? Some of these guys are going to be coming in and saying, look, you built this all wrong. Like, you need to change this and this and this. Without that, it's not going to work, right? So who's coming in with the knowledge, right? And so sometimes even having those bigger creators is going to bring that knowledge, it's going to bring that know-how and let you know what's what. Whereas the smaller guys are going to be like, I guess if they're successful, of course they can help you, but there's a little bit of that in it. So I think there's a lot of reasons that the bigger creators make sense because of those things. And then start thinking about some of the Web3 things, right? If you're going to be looking at sharing ownership and so on, right? It starts to get complex when you have more and more creators, and so having all of those little processes taken care of up front when you're doing a startup, it's a lot through. So having those more concentrated people to work with can make it easier.
So who are, just curious, Arnold, did you start with a large creator in mind? Or I know for us, it was like, hey, who can we get? But when you think about your ideal customer profile, I guess, or ideal creator profile, right? Like what do you think about, like, for each of your products?
Yeah, so I'll kind of go first. So yeah, I think I started with this idea of we're going to target these large creators and get a handful of them on the platform, and then the heavens will just open, right? And it actually ended up being that we had more small to medium-sized creators reaching out, and interestingly, what I was kind of seeing is that a lot of these folks had 20,000, 30,000 followers, maybe even as low as like 10. But the engagement was the most important thing. I mean, because ultimately I think you kind of brought up, hit on this point, Greg, where it's about, can you convince these folks to actually spend money, right? And to convert over. And so, we're actually seeing that, like, with a smaller following, 200 people will be willing to come over and actually pay to join their private community, right? Whereas I have had conversations with people with, 100, 200,000 followers, and I mean, it seems like a struggle to get any of their folks to actually convert over, just because, there's many factors, I suppose. But I mean, the loyalty or whatever, it just doesn't seem like
the strength of ties is inversely related to audience size, I believe, right?
Yeah, and it was actually, I think that's one thing that really surprised us as we were kind of going through that process. Like, whoa, yeah, I figured we flipped the switch and it would just be like, boom, And on the other end, I was kind of, initially thinking like, well, we're definitely going to work with these guys and help them out, but we're not expecting too much load over here. And
I think it works, Arnold, for transactional things, right? Like if you're going to sell merch, like you might get away with that, right? Like loose ties are okay, right? Like when you want to sell merch, but a community platform, much like the three of you all operate, right, requires like a high level of commitment, a perceived level of commitment, right? Minimally, like from someone who says, I'm into that, right? I'm going to opt into that, right? And because you don't service your followers, your audience the same way as you get larger and larger. I know so many creators, they don't even read their comments. They have no idea. It's become like a toxic wasteland to them. And they're just like, I can't look in there. Right. Like, and you always hear it. You see the evolution. Go watch your old videos. I read all your comments and you're like, I don't even mention the comments ever again. Right. It becomes untenable. Right. Like, just practically speaking. So I do think you're right that the smaller audience have more, probably potential value stored in them, right? Like from a high value point of view, right? Like it's like Van der Waals forces, going back to my old like organic chem days, right? But there's all these loose ties, right? Like very loose affiliations, like at large format creators, right?
But so this gets interesting too, because it kind of comes back to the point you made about how creators, I suppose, enter the journey, right? Are you entering it with like a goal or with sort of this business plan of this is where I want to get to, or are you just kind of pumping out free content and just kind of seeing where you'll go? Because I think, starting this process of creating, building a community, like this sort of exclusive or premium community for those folks that really are feeling the message and they want to engage, closer. I think starting that like earlier in the process helps you to avoid that point you mentioned of this is, just on the big platforms, that's just a toxic wasteland of crazy comments and trolls, right? Where if you're building that private space of people that are actually highly engaged and actually really into your content, then you're creating that safe place where, as a creator, I would imagine you do want to engage and you are excited about contributing and really sharing, more a closer look with these folks that are so interested in it, they're willing to compensate you, some amount of money, a month to be there, right? So I don't know. I think it gets interesting. It kind of comes back to that original thing. It's like, should you be starting this very early on, even if you've only got 10, 20 followers, right? I think it's not too early to actually start thinking about that stuff and to have a plan for it.
There are people philosophically opposed to doing anything for free, right? And they're because and there's some truisms, there's truth in that, right? Like ultimately, I think that if you don't accustom people that things have value, then it's hard to convince them there is value, right? Or to extract value, right? Like in the future. I don't know that I subscribe to that entirely, but I certainly have seen those challenges, right? Like, it's why like freemium rates tend to have like really low conversion, right? Because it takes a long time. But a community product, I think in particular, is a very difficult thing. Like to just say yes, you should be in. It's kind of like social audio, right? Like, how do I know I want to listen to these two jackasses talking? I have no idea what they talk about. Like it's ephemeral. These two have never been together before, right? Like so how do you build the reputational part? How do you build the word of mouth? How do you build the without a lot of longevity? Right, like built into it, right? And Jocelyn, to your point about education, I think to the extent that there's a process to which we have to do our own persona development. I think as builders, like trying to figure out like which kind of creator is going to be good fit for us. Who should we go after first? Who are we going to intentionally ignore? I think Jocelyn's coming usually from the other side, helping creators like map out a strategy and figure out where they're going. The reality is, most folks are like kind of like either haphazardly entering the fray or entering it with too specific a goal without understanding like the potentiality of the audience itself, right? Like, so you come in and like, you're a brand, you come in, I want to sell, right? Like, okay, that's great, but maybe that's not the optimal use case actually for you to use this medium. Maybe it's for getting customer feedback. Maybe it's for strengthening ties. Maybe it's for fending off competitors. Like there's all these other use cases that this thing may serve for, but because you over-index on this perceived value that you want to extract, you get the wrong thing out of it. Same much like creators who are like, I just want free shit from brands. Well, then you're leaving all this other opportunity on the table potentially, right? Like you're not developing your skills, your expertise, not building your community per se. You're just sort of focused on, the gauntlet, the hamster wheel, right?
And going back to the educational piece, I think that most of the creators create for the love of creating, not for the emphasis on business building. And I think that's when it becomes kind of problematic, because sometimes they'll dedicate themselves to the craft of creating, dedicating a lot of hours to this craft. And I'm seeing this on social audio now, where people will host these spaces for 5 hours or whatever it is. And then they kind of get burned out because they feel they're not getting supported from the team. It's just like, well, you volunteered to do this. You volunteered to do the 7 hours. No one told you to do this. Yes, it's great. You got the ephemeral and you got the high of collecting this community, but don't get upset. I mean, yes, it's nice to get acknowledged and things like that. I'm not saying that. I think that's essential. But I think a lot of times what ends up happening is a lot of creators go down this path to say more is better. The more time I spend on it is better. It's this busy mentality of like, oh, I'm busy versus I'm being productive. And I think that that's one issue. The other thing too is if you have in my marketing, my business stuff that I do for clients, one of the key things that we always kind of discuss is like, why are you doing this? Who are you serving? What's your why? So when you present stuff, even if you come in hot and say, I'm going to sell stuff, if your community, your audience knows why you want the revenue, they'll buy in and invest into it. They'll say, oh, you want to sell this merch in order to get better equipment, in order to give us better content. I'm on board with that. I feel like I'm contributing to it. It's almost like the creator coin. It's like, oh, I'm gonna buy your creator coin because I see your stock going up. That type of thing. Why I'm investing in NFTs or all that kind of stuff. It's not the image, the weird little big image that's like like a weird JPEG. It's more about, oh, I'm cool with all these other people that have this JPEG. So I think creators, they need, like, how music used to have A&Rs. There needs to be something for creators like that. Again, it goes back to the education and the mentorship, and that's what I'm looking to build now with the and I'll kind of announce it here. I was supposed to announce it yesterday, but it was delayed, and I've been kind of waiting to connect with Greg about this. Is like, now I am the admin for the creator community within Twitter, and the emphasis of this creator community is to help creators monetize their brand. That's it. So I'm going to be very selective as who comes in. Like the first 50 to 100 is going to be very curated. I don't want to. It's not a numbers game for me there, because I want everybody to grow and prosper, and to be open to share. Like, oh, I'm trying to get from $1,000 a month to $5,000 a month. How do I get there? Or I want to go from 5,000 to 20,000. Or I want to go from 20,000 to 50, or 50 to 100. How do I? What's the process to get there? And that type of transitional discussion isn't really found anywhere. You just get these anecdotal kind of things like, oh, I already have 100,000 followers. And then you ask them if they could do it again. It's like, probably not. It was early days. I just happened in early and I got all these followers. So you can't really duplicate it now. So that's kind of like, yeah, it's good information, but it's not helpful for the person that's just getting started.
Hustling said something interesting though, right? Because, and Arnold, you touched on this before, creators are there because they like to create. So it seems like there's multiple points of view here. Like, why are you a creator? I'm a creator because I want to build a community. I'm a creator because I want to connect to people like me. I'm a creator because I want to build a business. I'm a creator because I have something to sell. I'm a creator because whatever. It seems like, and I believe, if you remember my old monetization chart of all the ways the different economies sort of going on inside the creator economy, people are starting in a different quadrant for sure. And that's an important part of the sort of conversation, I think, and ultimately understanding it. And I do think in that persona development, we probably want to figure out hey, which of these rank these, which one are you most interested in doing? Then what, because that sort of starts to set the point of view. We shouldn't force everybody to treat their audience like customers unless that's actually the motivation, the goal, right? Much like we shouldn't try to make everyone try to exude the same level of passion when maybe some people are there because they're here for the little drips and drabs, right? But they learn a lot just by paying attention, but they don't share the same level of excitement, right? By the way, I just want to introduce everyone to Chris, new member of the Slack, new friend from I met last week actually at the information conference. He is also building a community platform, so you guys will all get a chance to connect with him in Slack as well. Chris, I know you've been listening for a little bit. I'm not sure if you wanted to add or share anything.
No, I appreciate it, Greg. Like I said, I apologize, guys. I hopped on late. I was trying to move meeting, but couldn't. But Greg gave me some insight as far as some of your all's backgrounds and just kind of playing around the Slack channel. Love seeing the engagement and excited to kind of hop in with you guys and share and contribute where I can. So I really appreciate you guys welcoming me. I'm looking forward to it.
Sweet. Well, how about this? Let's switch back to the thread. I'm going to go through all 10. And then I'm going to have each of you pick your favorite or thing that you think you can act on the most and have you sort of share what you think can be done. So number one thing I point out was just getting rid of eligibility rules, right? Half these tools make it so hard to get to the point that you can monetize that basically they're exclusionary for almost everyone. Smaller, faster payouts, right? Most of the platforms have these minimums before you can actually get your money. I think that gets in the way of you actually investing back into your own platform, right? Scalable take rates, right? So, we've historically seen a static take rate, across, but we've seen some evolution here where new platforms are testing different take rates or lifetime rates or limits and things like that. So it'd be interesting to know your thoughts on that. Number 4 is about maximizing sort of the monetization method. So if you remember, one of my first threads in this domain was really about all the different ways that creators can monetize. We may get overly focused on one because it's the one that we think about the most or the one that we were drawn to, but are there other ways that we could be, or other unlocks that we could be offering? Number 5 is to capture communities, right? So as some creators, not all, as I said before, are transitioning into a community-based, sort of orientation. How do we give them more tools to sort of make the community a viable business, not just a new sort of bit of work to service and operate against? Number 6 was to embrace commerce, right? Like, how do we make, not only how do we make them better salespeople, but how do we actually help them sell more things, right? Because there's a lot of opportunities for commerce to be explored still. Number 7 was to circle crypto, because now here, I'll be the first to tell you, I think crypto should likely will have a role, but I think it should come later for most people. I think most of them should figure out how to make money first, get to break even, get to that, what's it called, financially successful creator state, and then worry about sort of like opportunistic retirement and all these other things that I think crypto offers like tremendous opportunities in. There are, by the way, for example, like Arnold's working in music. I do think there are interesting new models for crypto upfront in the music space as opposed to later, because they're reinventing the way that in broken systems where creators are fundamentally robbed, right? Now, some would say that all the social platforms do that. I would argue not nearly as bad as say like the music industry does, right? There's a lot of innovation here that potentially by bringing in the blockchain, movie production, et cetera, like some of these other things I think could be innovated in other ways earlier. But generally, I think crypto probably should wait a little longer for most people. Transitioning to SaaS, we all raised hands. How are we charging? Guess what? None of us are doing SaaS, right? I think SaaS is hard for startups currently because there isn't quite the adequate level of maturation, to Joselin's point as well, that you have to think of yourself as a business to understand that these investments make sense, right? And to understand that tool is a lever for me to get more value out, right? And right now, a creator understands like, oh, I buy a better camera, that makes the quality better. Like they understand that part of the value chain really well, right? But getting these other parts, like knowing I should buy CRM, I should buy messaging, I should buy community tools, I should buy live streaming tools, I should buy whatever it is, that requires a maturation in sort of how we think about what I'm doing and why I do it, right? That we still need to explore some more. Number 9 was just to be extensible. So I think like, look, all of us are building solutions to problems that we see, but we obviously, I think collectively here all have like almost the amount of people shown on screen as like our whole teams. So like we're probably like 3x the number of people shown on screen for like all 4 of our companies, right? So we can't build everything. We don't want to build everything. How do we design so that we could work with others well to increase the level of success, not only for ourselves, but for our creator customers? And then number 10 was just to bring data back. I harp on this like you wouldn't believe, but this is useless if you don't have the data. The advantage that most of the social platforms have over all of us is the data they have about our audience. The second we become the owners of that data, the second the quicker we can sort of maximize the profit potential for all of our customers. So, as we wrap up, I went through a lot of things. I know you've all had a chance to read it already, though. But I'm curious, any favorites on that list? Anything you think is fundamentally stupid, or anything that you think you might want to operate on, or that you're thinking or considering?
Yeah, Greg, I'll just kind of toss a few thoughts that immediately hit me. So I think one was the minimum payout that you listed. Just not, maybe a slight defense of this, just from what I've seen on my own side, is I do think that having certain minimums actually helps the creatives, because you've seen with some of the big payment processors, right? If you are withdrawing small amounts, the fees can actually end up eating up most of your profit with those smaller transactions. So in some respects, having a reasonable minimum, I think, is actually okay. Now, that's not a full defense of the whole thing, but I do think that needs to be factored in, right? I think the other thing that comes to mind, certainly on the community side of things, one thing that we've learned here, we set out to build the platform, right, to allow you to have the super fan community and do all of this. But, time and time again, we heard, I love this, but I just don't have the time to actually manage a community, but I'd love to do it. And so, kind of thinking more about what I think you've talked about in the past a lot is the tools and services. Like, we're building lots of tools, but there's that services component as well. So I think that's a big piece that needs to also be factored in when we think about community platforms, right?
And from a community point of view, I think, Arnold, to your point, it's in the community realm, it's really about making it possible to identify the people you can trust in your community and elevating them to roles to be helpful as opposed to sort of like, yes, we both agree. I think all agree. There's a huge business opportunity that none of us is pursuing in the operational side of like creator work, right? Hopefully mentioned that there's no LinkedIn, right? But I do think, but yes, I think like right now, you bring in all your members and we're just like, hey, just get people in. But what we probably should be doing is like, these people are the best members. These people are the ones you could trust. These are people we recommend. This helps spread the work out to diffuse sort of this, what could feel like a sunk cost or a heavy upfront cost.
No, definitely. And we're moving with the small team we have, right? We have to focus on just getting the platform stable. But that next services piece is a huge focus for us because I mean,
we get it, man. You're flicking every 2 seconds here. Like I get this. No, it's by the way, this is not Peter's fault because I actually asked him to put back in this thing to deal with like bandwidth changes, but like we need to tune how aggressive it is in actually deciding that we should adjust the bandwidth. Abhinav or Chris, any favorites from the list or any things that you think are actionable or any defenses you want to provide for the behavior that is the current norm?
I'll just hop in real quick. I think for me, the maximizing the monetization piece, because I think as we discussed earlier, Greg, like I said, I'm going after a very small niche group of what I would say nano or micro creators. And so, a lot of it is almost education on telling them what they're worth, what they could make, you know what I mean? And so to me, making sure they understand the options and not just on our platform, but other platforms that are out there as well to them, I think is only going to help them, grow their audience and make it, not as much money as possible. So like we talked about before, it's not all about the money for a lot of these creators, but just knowing the options that are out there, right? And I think that's a big piece of it because there's so many things that are getting thrown at them right now, and so making sure you can kind of help boil it down. So that one to me really jumped out.
The data part too, right? Again, even with Arnold, with finding the right people in your community, finding and knowing your worth. These are data-driven things that I think they operate oftentimes sort of from a gut feel or by emulating someone without necessarily getting the full representation of their value.
Absolutely.
I mean, anything?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Hey, Greg, I'm sorry. I got to run. I got to jump on another meeting.
All right, buddy. See you in a bit, man.
See you guys.
Thank you for joining us.
All right.
I would say for me, I've been thinking through crypto a lot. I think that's the one that I think that is really, if you're building a business now and you don't at least somehow try to harness the things that crypto is trying to achieve in what you're building, even if you don't do it in a pure blockchain, in that using those mechanics, you're probably missing something. So, I think as builders, we're trying to capture what is the essence of those things. And as we do that, we realize exactly how immutable it is. As you do it, it's Pandora's box, right? The nature of the thing is it's immutable, right? That's why it's so amazing. Then that also brings is once you make these decisions, you can't just walk them back. You can't just change your mind, right? You're really having to think through the nth degree of possibilities, right? And this is me as this is my daily job. I do this every day. This is the only thing I'm trying to do, right? Whereas
what you have nights? You have a night job?
And night job is the day job, but it's for creators to think through that. I think that for them to be using the same technology, I think it's powerful. But then they're also doing things the same way. They need to be thinking things through that same depth. And my concern is if they don't, they're going to do themselves some harm. They're going to committing things that, giving away things that they didn't perhaps understand. So I think it ties in with the education piece a lot, that we all need to educate ourselves. It's a really great opportunity. It's a great movement, but everybody in the whole space kind of should be helping each other out to get up to speed on that.
Yeah, I will add one thing that I loved what you said, because I do think adapting the concepts that are working well in crypto and even just doing them in a fiat-based or merit-based world has a lot of value in normalizing the behavior, the interaction model, all those other pieces. And then eventually, as crypto becomes more widely available, easier to deploy, you can start to layer your crypto blockchain versions of things onto the blockchain. and sort of provide the best of both worlds. But like I said before, I still think most creators should work for fiat. If you want to sell collectibles, go do it, but you could just sell them, right? Like you don't need to actually put them on the blockchain per se. You still know who you've issued them to, right? Like there's still always a record. It's not necessarily an immutable record, right? But there is a record, right? And then that could be translated in the future, but doesn't have to encumber the sales process up front. Jocelyn, you're the last one. Last feedback, last comment, last thoughts before we wrap up for today. I appreciate all of you being here, by the way.
Yes, this is great. I don't know what's going on with the video, but I think the running theme that I've mentioned throughout this whole thing is just the educational piece, just because all these things without the proper, application or understanding of how to apply it, it becomes an unnecessary, almost like burden. Like, for example, yes, the first thing that you mentioned was the eliminating the eligibility rules. All right. So let's take, for example, the tip jar component in Twitter and Twitter Spaces or whatever, or just Twitter Spaces in general. They opened it up to everybody. So everybody has access to it. Does that mean that the quality of content goes up? That means that there's more options. But if you don't have a way to really capitalize on that feature, you miss out on everything. And then you get into this like mental circle. Is it now that I have access, I should be making money? And even when they looked at super follows and they said that out of all the super follows, the entire money that was collected was $6,000. And I don't know where that number came from, or whatever it is. There's this fallacy that just because you have something that you're automatically going to be successful in it. And I think that needs to be some sort of transitional plan. Every app should focus on, okay, how could we help our creators be successful no matter what it is? So every one of these creator tools should have some educational, some mentorship, something, so that they can transition and navigate to that next desired level. And not everybody wants to have 1 million followers or make $20,000 a month or whatever it is. So I know that's not scalable, but I think when more people have some sort of guidance, it would make the whole process easier for everybody. Those are just like, I'm a very big supporter of just getting the proper education, getting the proper mentorship, getting, a proper community that's all about, all learning from each other so that we could, best utilize these tools in the best way that we know how with the least amount of effort. That's kind of like the big picture in my mind.
Yeah, and I agree. This is still so early, right? Like that there aren't really best practices yet. There
Correct.
are, if anything, there's just examples of exceptional uses, right? Like, but there's very few patterns to draw on from any of the things we've seen really work, right?
Right, because those are outliers, right?
Everyone's an outlier. Like everything successful is an outlier at this point, right? Like for the most part, right? Like we haven't built a systemic way of getting a person from A to Z, right? Like everyone's experimenting and finding these ways through this process. So I appreciate that as well. Well, thank you, everyone. I do appreciate it. Shoot me your Rally username. In case you don't know, you can get some free AMA today. I'll drop a link out in a minute. But shoot me your Rally username and I will reward you all for being my great guest today. It's been a wonderful conversation. I hope the folks watching got a chance to sort of like at least see how we try to rationalize some of these things. Maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong. But I do think it's an important discussion to continue to have. And certainly I think as we continue to find best practices, we want to bring and share more of them with the world. So thank you, Abhinav, thank you, Chris, thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you, Arnold, of course, for joining us. It's been a pleasure and an honor. So we'll see you all probably tomorrow for our interview with John Allen. If not, maybe on the news or at some future episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having us.